everyone. So today I want to talk about what happens when court and the professionals around court see you as the problem. How do you shift that narrative and make sure that your voice and your story gets heard? And I promise you, this one is going to be an absolute game changer. Family court massively misinterprets the behavior of, I'm going to call them protective parents, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So, if you are a parent and you are going up against someone who you believe has abusive traits, not just to you, but to your children, then what you're taking to the court, your concerns, your suggestions are protective. Now, obviously, protective has become a bit of a term that can be misused, and it can be sound as though it's being hypercritical. In the way I'm using it, what I mean is you're wanting to protect your children, but actually that can be completely misinterpreted by the court, and actually you can end up looking like you are either abusive or trying to alienate the other parent, when in fact they are using DARVO. They are turning the narrative on its head and making themselves out to be the victim and you to be the perpetrator. And that narrative, once it's gathered momentum, can be incredibly difficult to overturn. And once they have got professionals bought in, you are fighting an upward battle. So you might have found that you've been called things like hostile or uncooperative or unreasonable, controlling, overbearing. Those are some of the examples of the words that might have been used against you. This is not only frustrating, because that's not the truth, it can destroy your case. Or at least, if you don't have the right tools, it can. And what I want to show you today is, one, how it happens, and two, how can you counter that so that you aren't punished for being protective and expressing your concerns and telling your story, whilst the other person who actually is the abusive parent gets away with it and gets seen as being the protective one, the one that is protecting and looking like they're the reasonable one. So let's turn this around. So first off, why does this happen? I mean, it sounds ridiculous. It could even happen. Courts are meant to be trained. They're meant to understand this. But in reality, they're not. They're trained on the book version. That's totally different to a lived version. That's totally different to what it actually looks like. And unfortunately, in a lot of times, you have to have been up close to it to know what it is. You have been up close to it. You've experienced the subtleties of their abuse. You've experienced how what might look or sound like a reasonable sentence is actually highly controlling or even malicious and certainly belittling and undermining. And yet, when you try and say that to someone, you can come across as being the unreasonable one. You can come across as being paranoid. And this all plays into this idea that you are unstable. Because what happens when we're frustrated or when we feel we're not being heard is we can become emotional. It triggers old wounds. It triggers some of our childhood wounds about when we weren't heard or listened to as a kid, when people dismissed what we wanted and what we needed. And so we can speak louder, we can raise our voice, or we can collapse into tears, or we can get angry. These are all perfectly normal, natural responses that we have within ourselves. But in a court environment, it plays perfectly into that false narrative that you are the problem. And then standing there going, see, I told you so, makes them look more credible because it looks like they've told the truth. They've nailed it. They know exactly who you are. So therefore, if that's true, everything they say must be true. So it's really important that you understand how that happens. So when you react emotionally, whether that be to emails, an email or a text comes through and boom, it's triggered you, and you send off a rocket of, oh, you're so annoying. Why are you doing this? Why are you always trying to control me? You've done it. I've done it. We've all done it. I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying that is then perfect evidence for them to go, look at what I get. I only asked about this and look at the response I get. And so you've got to check yourself with those things and learn to respond. Emails or text might be in private, but they're going to get shared in public. But if you do that in court or in a CAFCAS meeting, then they're going to start putting A and B together and making C. Or even worse, they're going to put A and B together and make Z, because they're going to think that they're right. Their version of you, the false version of you, is correct. So they're gonna end up with this version of you that matches your ex's narrative and paints you as being problem. And once they paint you as being the problem, everything you say lacks credibility. You need twice the amount of evidence. You need to be twice as angelic in order to get yourself heard. The second part of this is, what if you push too hard? What if you are putting your boundaries in place? What if you are really adamant that no, this cannot happen, because you know the consequences of that? You know, you've seen before, you know how this is going to turn out, you know the real reason that they're doing this. And so you're trying to stop your child from being put into this position. And so you say, you're adamant, no, 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 that cannot happen. Well, then you'll get labeled as being high conflict. And it might be that you're labeled as being a high conflict couple or a case, or an individual. They might say that you are the one that is bringing the conflict. So this might mean that you look paranoid because everything that they do, you know the context, you know how their mind works, you understand it. But the professionals don't. They don't have any of that background. They don't understand the psychology of your ex. They don't understand those subtle and covert manipulation tactics. And so when you're basically shouting your story, trying to give them more and more evidence of this thing that they're doing, you come across as being obsessive, paranoid, even delusional. And again, this all plays into that false narrative that your ex is trying to present about you. That assertiveness that you are trying to be, when you've been in a relationship where you've been controlled, where you haven't been able to say or do or think or feel anything, you've had to keep in line, you've had to comply. And when you come out, you find your voice and you want to speak. What you've got to understand is how that might be interpreted, especially if your ex is presenting as quiet and very controlled in what they're saying, and you are shouting or you are loudly protesting something. You might come across as being the aggressive one, which again fits in with their narrative. Equally, if you don't back down, if there's no negotiation, and again, I understand that you don't negotiate with a narcissist, but if you equally stand your ground and they can somehow make it look like they're trying to be reasonable, you are going to look like you can't co-parent, that you're refusing to co-parent with them. So again, you're playing into this idea of you being uncooperative, unreasonable, controlling. All the things that they are actually doing, you're the one that's going to get labeled with them. My key point from this really is to remember that this is a long game. You cannot expect anyone to understand this off the bat, because we didn't. It took a lot of Googling. It took a lot of self-reflection, took a hell of a lot of speaking to other people in this situation to really understand what you've experienced. You can't expect someone who just sees a snapshot to get it at the first go. You need to understand it's going to take time. So every time you are provoked and you react, you're just giving them evidence. So it's about not doing that. So what we're going to do now is look at, how do you disarm them? How do you shift that narrative so that those perceptions can change? Well, the first one being, you need to learn how to communicate more strategically than emotionally. I get it. Your emotions are at the surface. They're always there because this is your experience. You're hurt. You've been targeted. You've been traumatized. So your emotions are always bubbling away under the surface. You're also dealing with something that affects your children. We're all going to go into that fight mode when it's about our kids. But all of those things play into their narrative. So when you're communicating, you need to think about that. You need to be aware of how others might perceive you. So you've got to stay as calm and composed as possible. Even when you're talking about really serious, difficult, heartbreaking things, you need to maintain your emotional regulation. Try and be solution focused rather than constantly presenting all the bad things, all the problems with it, all the reasons it won't work. Try and do the opposite. Before you go into court, before you go into hearings, think about a solution rather than just no, no, no. Because again, that will fall into that controlling narrative. Whereas if you present reasonable solutions and it's your ex that is going, no, I'm not accepting that, you have shifted it. By you being reasonable and solution focused, you've quickly shifted that narrative to show that actually they're the ones showing that if it's not their way, it's no way, which means it's all about them and what they want and not about the kids and what's in their best interest. Stay child-centered. Now, this is the one that a lot of people struggle with because they think they're doing it. They think by talking about the children, that's child-centered. What we mean by child-centered is not bringing up things that are personal, not adult things. Now, there is relevance to them, but it's how you present it. So what you want to be doing is doing everything from how is this impacting the child? How could this impact the child? How is this impacting now? How is it going to impact them in the midterm? How is it going to impact them in the long term? What does this mean in terms of their development? What does it mean in terms of their emotional needs, for example? You really need to break this down and go as deep as possible through the layers of what this really looks like for the child. That is what we mean by child focused. What does it mean for them? And I mean the depth of that. And ideally using language that social workers or the court are going to understand. So making yourself familiar with what they're assessing it against, that will help you to present your evidence. So when you're controlling your emotional presentation and you're not being dysregulated, that requires some work. I'm not going to lie. We all get triggered. You know, it's natural for us to feel a response to something. We are not Cybermen. You know, we have emotions for a reason. And so if someone says something upsetting, you're allowed to be upset. What we're talking about and what we mean by regulation and managing your emotions is it's a shorter time between trigger and calm. It's not to say trigger and calm have to happen at the same time. It's okay for you to be triggered, take a few deep breaths, calm yourself. What makes it more harmful is when you are triggered and you flap and you go into your freeze, flight, or fight response and you can't calm yourself. That bit there, that long gap between you being able to calm, which can take weeks sometimes, that is where you need to do the work. And you can do that with the I Am Safe program, which is available through the Court Prep Toolkit, or you can work with a therapist as well, whatever works best for you. In some very practical terms, speak with a measured and neutral tone. The more passionate we become, or the more emotional we become, the louder we might get, the faster we might start to speak, the more our voice might start to go, because that's what our nervous system is doing. It's what our heart rate's doing. And so our voice can mirror that. And that basically gives it away that you are not regulated, that you are feeling unstable in that moment. And so being mindful, practice in front of the mirror a few times. How do I do this? How do I maintain that? What does it sound like when I'm speaking like this? Record yourself, just practice over and over again. When you're dealing with your ex or even professionals, you know, if a professional sends you their report and you're not happy with it, don't respond straight away. Sleep on it for sure. If they're asking for a fairly quick response, give yourself as long as you possibly can. Do not send long emails that are very emotionally led, that are very angry. So you need to keep your emotions in check and keep it brief, informative, formal, and friendly, so that you are not playing into that narrative. You need to keep it short as possible. break it down into key bullet points. Again, there are tips in this, there are frameworks for this within our parallel parenting course and within the court prep toolkit as well. So let's give you a quick example of this. What you might want to say, which is very emotionally led and very true, I'm not saying this isn't true, it's just not going to help you, is my ex is manipulating the system and lying about me. He's controlling and dangerous. I'm not saying any of those things are true. If that's what you go with, there's nothing in that for a professional or for the court to really take. This is much better. There's a pattern of concerning behaviour that impacts our child's emotional well-being. Here is a summary of the incidents with supporting documentation. You can see the difference from a receiver, the person you're sending it to, they've got more control with that. They can look at that, they can read that and think, okay, there's information here for me to take on board. This person's coming across very balanced. And it's just a very different way for them to receive your message. And that's without any of the content, just the wording of it presents it very differently. So what I suggest you do is write it down first and then scratch out all the emotional bits and then just focus and send the facts and solutions. If you're struggling with this, use AI. Just pop onto ChatGTP, pour in all the crap that you want to say, and then say, like, take out all the emotion, take out all the facts and solutions that I could send to a professional. And it will, the great thing about AI is it doesn't use any of those things. It can take out all of that for you. And then even if you don't like what they've provided, as in the way it's worded, you can change that, but you've got a structure that has taken the emotion out of it. The second one is frame your concerns as professional rather than personal. So think about it as if you were presenting this to your boss rather than your ex that you don't like. You've got a history where they've hurt you, they've traumatized you, they have abused you. That's personal. What you want to do, though, is in court, is you've got to take that out of it and you need to present this as professional as possible. They will shut down when they start hearing you personally bash them. They will just label you as it being parental conflict. Whereas what we want is to be able to show that this is a child welfare concern, that actually they have got a duty to look at this because they have a duty to the child. So let's reframe that. So, for example, he's deliberately trying to turn the child against me, or she is deliberately trying to turn the child against me. Two, there are indicators of resistance and fear in my child, and you might want to put a few examples in there, that are consistent with our previous relationship. Research shows that children benefit from healthy relationships with both parents, and I would like the court to consider child-focused interventions to explore this dynamic. Again, you're not labeling anything and saying, you need to look at this. You have a duty to look at the child's welfare. This is impacting their welfare, therefore look at it. Use their language, use child focus, use the best interest of the child, use stability, rather than you try to force your issue on them. Next one, anticipate their tactics and preempt them. So this is totally what Court Prep Toolkit is all about. You getting out ahead of it. Know that they're going to paint you as hostile and high conflict. Know that they're going to use DARVO, and be aware and ready to not just preempt it, but counter it in the way that you present. So I understand the importance of co-parenting, and I have made every effort to engage in constructive communication. However, I have encountered resistance, which I've documented. My focus remains on solutions that support my child's well-being. Again, this is about solutions and about framing it in a way that judges have to take it seriously. You are talking about the child's well-being, they have a duty to do that. So, in summary, what you will need to be doing is flipping this script, flipping this false narrative that has been set. You don't want to be labelled as being hostile, controlling, or difficult. Now, if you have been labelled as that, it's not done and dusted. You can change this by following these steps. Child-focused and calm. Be a problem solver, not a problem maker, and use facts, not emotions, to deliver your evidence and in the way that you communicate. Corporate Toolkit has all the tools you need, including I Am Safe, which will help you manage your emotions, Evidence Tracker, and Master Your Evidence to help you really present the best quality child focused evidence and all the preparation you need. I'll leave the link for that in the description. I'd love to hear your comments. Pop them below. Let me know what you think. Did it resonate with you? What's your experience been? What would you share that you think would help anyone? If you need any support, do reach out at inquiries at getcutready.co.uk.